this zine that I have specifically is a really, really amazing zine. Myself and some comrades have consistently put out and disseminated, just in neighborhoods, through uprisings, all kinds of situations. It's definitely for the times right now. But, I feel like organizing against police violence and policing in general is never going to go out of style until the police are abolished. But this is such a great zine because it just has a lot of practical information and just very direct action oriented and steps you can take. But the reason why I want to read it is because it's really inaccessible. I don't really see the zine anywhere online. Me and other comrades have looked and searched for digital copies, but can't find it anywhere. So I figured, what a great way to have this zine existing, especially on Instagram, and reading it. The zine is called End Police Brutality in Providence, Community Justice and Solidarity. So it's a pretty, it's blue colored. I like to zhuzh up my zines, and like always, usually regarding zine culture, I usually provide them for free to people, but do accept donations. But let's get started. January 8th, 2013, Providence police raided 2 Cambodian households in West End, entering without a warrant. They held everyone at gunpoint, beat a 13-year-old in his sleep, terrorized and humiliated women, including a 77-year-old grandmother, stole property, and arrested innocent people. PPD violated the dignity of everyone in the house and grossly disrespected their humanity. This is not the first attack against low-income communities of color. Systemic racial oppression is woven into the fabric of the U.S. economic political framework. Every day, our communities are under attack at the hands of the police, causing pain and suffering within our families. They engage in racist practices, criminalize youth as suspects, violate our dignity, dehumanize women, and deny us any chance of justice. We have entirely lost faith in our law enforcement and denounce the criminal justice system as a corrupt institution that will never respond to our community's needs. We need to build towards a safer community, one based on solidarity instead of terror, mutual aid rather than oppression, and above all else, accountability and justice. To this end, we will organize to keep our own streets and families safe, developing new relationships amongst one another with love, solidarity, and mutual aid. This was written, you know what? I don't know. Probably in the Tumblr era. We printed it out and disseminated them. By we, I mean like me and the collective I was living with in 2014. Call a friend, not cops. There are a lot of situations that we are not equipped to face alone. We need someone's help, but that someone does not have to be the police. So call a friend instead of the cops. We should choose someone who can arrive quickly, help de-escalate the situation, and figure out a comfortable ending. This will work best if we set up support networks in advance. Designing our support network can be as simple as checking in with people we know to see who we can call when we need help or support, and letting folks know that they can call us. The real beauty of this idea is that it encourages people to do something free and easy. build better communities by having an advanced networking plan for who/when to call instead of the cops when stuff goes down. More info, critical resistance, a world without walls. Why do people even need police? Police violence, racial oppression, and poverty enforcement. When was the last time you felt safe around police? Do you ever feel comfortable when they patrol your neighborhood, follow you around, pat you down, or stand in the halls of your school? For people who face an ever-present threat of police aggression, law enforcement represents unjust authority to violently raid, intimidate, constantly surveil, arrest, evict, incarcerate, and deport those accused of being suspicious, threatening, or illegal. Every day in these communities, such as West End, police target poor, Latino, and Southeast Asian people and act towards them in ways that dehumanizes and disempowers them. The U.S. criminal justice system operates by enforcing laws that work against the well-being of communities of color, be they laws related to, quote, illegal drugs, immigration, or foreclosure. Its main purpose is to surveil, incarcerate, deport, and displace people of color and the working poor in the name of safety and security. These practices combine with other discriminatory policies enacted by government institutions that operate in the interests of the financial and political elite to structurally oppress and disempower our people. Families caught in this deeply entangled web of injustice and poverty experience fear, trauma, as well as suffering. As a community of oppressed peoples, we all have to share these pains. We have all grown up with fear of police violence, with the threat of punitive discipline in school, court, or in the jail yard. And we have all hesitated to call the cops in response to a traumatic event. Our struggle unites us. We must speak out against police violence in our neighborhoods and take action towards building power in order to hold corrupt institutions accountable and keep our own communities safe. Further, we must find ways to create new relationships between one another in hopes of transforming our approach to justice in our community, relying not on corrupt police departments, but instead relying on each other to keep our community safe and protected from acts of injustice and violence. Students on a prison track. Schools as part of cradle to prison pipeline. Schools are meant to be institutions that serve the educational needs of our community, which can be debated. They are to foster learning among our youth and facilitate their understanding of the world that surrounds them. Instead of providing a safe place for students to grow, city administrators have converted our schools into paramilitarized zones in which young people of color are targeted and socialized as suspects rather than students. Such an environment violates their dignity and denies them their freedom to think and act critically. Armed police officers are placed at almost every middle and high school, monitoring student behavior and interfering in the process of punitive discipline. School administrators respond to common student infractions with racially motivated, heavy-handed discipline measures, introducing our youth to the criminal injustice system at an early age. This racist incarceration system criminalizes and pushes them out of school and into prisons that serve the interests of the rich and their political class, effectively creating a cycle of poverty within our communities of color. Community accountability. addressing violence collectively. We are told to call the police and rely on the criminal justice system to address violence within our communities. However, if police and prisons facilitate or perpetuate violence against us rather than increase our safety, how do we create strategies to address violence within our communities, including police brutality, foreclosure, eviction, domestic violence, sexual violence, child abuse, and that don't rely on police or prisons? Community accountability is one critical option. Community accountability is a community-based strategy rather than a police/prison-based strategy to address violence within our communities. Community accountability is a process in which a community, a group of friends, a family, a church, a temple, a workplace, a social center, an apartment complex, a neighborhood, etc., work together to do the following things. Establish values and practices as community to resist violent abuse and oppression and promote safety, support, and accountability. Develop sustainable strategies to address violence in the community, be that by agents of state institutions such as police or our own community members. Commit to transform the socio-political conditions that reinforce oppression and violence, i.e. poverty, inadequate school conditions, unjust use of authority. Provide safety and support to community members who are violently targeted by police, sexual predators, or anyone violating their human dignity. And beneath this, it has a grid, a kind of circular grid, which kind of lapses into each other. And I'll just read each circle that's all connected to community accountability. So the first top circle is create and affirm values and practices that resist abuse and oppression and encourage safety, support, and accountability. Next circle, develop sustainable strategies to address community members and state institutions' abusive behavior, create a process for them to account for their actions and transform their behavior. Next circle, commit to ongoing development of all members of the community and the community itself to transform the political conditions that reinforce oppression and violence. Next circle, provide safety and support to community members who are violently targeted that respect their self-determination. Now, there's a lot of debate that can happen around the idea of community membership. There isn't really members to specific community. Like, if I belong to the indigenous community or the Black community or the trans community, it's pretty widespread. And we have friends like, we have friends that have created, like Mia Mingus has created just different kind of ideas around having like pod mapping that's a little bit more local and less, massive than just an entire community. I can send some information or repost some information on that, on pod mapping. Collective autonomy, practical alternatives to police. Autonomous means self-governing, existing, and functioning independently. In denouncing a rampant, corrupt, inefficient, and hazardous institution such as the criminal and justice system, we must take steps towards developing our own means of community safety and transform our approach to justice. There have been various communities in different pockets of the world that have organized collectively to keep each other safe from threats of violence and oppression without relying on the police. CLASP, Philadelphia's autonomous blocks. In 1972, Philadelphia residents in the highest crime district in the city organized several neighborhood blocks to respond to muggings, burglaries, rape, and other acts of victimization. A block assembly was called to address the rising threat of victimization. 80 people from 5 different blocks came together and discussed what they could do to prevent acts of victimization in their community. They decided to self-manage and take collective action. Everyone wanted safer streets that could be walked by day and by night, free from fear. All grew to realize that the only way to safety was through linking neighbors together as friends instead of strangers. By taking the first steps towards building and maintaining community connections between neighbors and residents, they achieved a tighter community, one in which people were familiar with one another and alerted the rest of the block of any threat of victimization using free-on horns. In 1976, there were 600 organized autonomous blocks throughout Philadelphia. People were more comfortable spending time outside, and a CLASP survey showed an average of 75% less crime on organized blocks compared to their respective police districts. Steps towards community accountability and justice. Philadelphia's autonomous blocks serve as a strong example of what can be achieved when community members self-organize to keep their own neighborhoods safe. Their model of organizing directly with neighbors and community members is one that can be experimented with locally to address rising police violence against individuals and families. One of the first steps we can take towards addressing our needs is to organize a community assembly with neighborhoods on our own block and those surrounding. It can be a social event, bring food and share experiences over dinner. Only once we build connections with each other will we be able to relate to the struggles of others. Often, they are the common struggles that bind us all as low-income people of color. We should all also empower those people whose voices are often muted in other political realms, including other and people of color, youth, women, ex-prisoners, indigenous peoples, refugees, undocumented immigrants, trans, LGBTQIA to S peoples. Together, we can discuss the issues that directly affects us in a comfortable environment. Finally, we should develop solutions that respond to our direct needs, reliant on the love and solidarity of one another as members of a community instead of government bureaucrats that represent violent institutions of never-ending oppression and injustice. The possible outcomes: instant response network to police violence, a network of neighbors on a block that respond immediately to house raids and other acts of police brutality. Everyone comes out of their houses to support the family/individual and counter police power. Could also record cops to document, also known as Cop Watch. Red de Defensa, loosely in a place in PVD, a network of responders that support people under threat of deportation. Rape crisis centers, centers for women who have been victims of sexual violence to seek refuge and support, are examples of community accountability. Dealing with police, know your rights. So the cancer on our streets will not disappear overnight until we all build systems of mutual aid and community accountability that eliminate our reliance on police. we will still have to deal with them on the day-to-day basis. With every police contact, you should know your rights and be familiar with how to defend yourself legally. If you are stopped by police, you have the right to remain silent. If you wish to exercise that right, say so out loud. You have the right to refuse to consent to a search of yourself, your car, or your home. You are not under arrest. You have the right to calmly leave. You have the right to a lawyer if you are arrested. Ask for one immediately. Regardless of your immigration or citizenship status, you have constitutional rights. Your responsibilities: do stay calm, do not interfere with or obstruct the police, do not lie or give false documents, do prepare yourself and your family in case you are arrested. Now, a lot of these pointers can definitely be debated, especially for people who are incarcerated, or, it's like rights are very, they're helpful to know, but it's not like rights have actually stopped people from being murdered by the police. So just put that into perspective, but I'm going to continue. Do remember the details of the encounter. Do file a police misconduct incident report should your rights be violated. Forms are available in English or Spanish. There's like a bit.ly that they're listing. I wonder if it still works. I want to check that out. The bit.ly address is bit.ly/police misconduct-form. And it says, if you are arrested for questioning, stay calm. Ask if you are free to leave. If the officer says yes, calmly and silently walk away. If you are under arrest, you have a right to know why. You have the right to remain silent and cannot be pushed for refusing to answer questions. If you wish to remain silent, tell the officer out loud. Again, in some states, you might must give your name if asked to identify yourself. You do not have to consent to a search again. If yourself or your belongings, but police may pat down your clothing if they suspect a weapon. You should not physically resist, but you have the right to refuse consent for any further search. If you do consent, it can affect you later on in court. If you are stopped in your car, stop the car in a safe place as quickly as possible. Turn off the car, turn off the internal light, open the window halfway and place your hands on the steering wheel. Upon request, show police your driver's license, registration, and proof of insurance. If an officer or immigration agent asks to look inside your car, you can refuse to consent to the search. Both drivers and passengers have the right to remain silent. Always try to write down the officer's name, badge number, or car number, and the time you were stopped, preferably all four. If the immigration service arrests you, do not answer any questions. So this is ICE. Do not say anything about where you were born or how you entered the U.S. Do not show any documents except a letter from a lawyer. Above all, do not show any false documents. Do not sign anything, especially an order of voluntary departure, without first talking to a lawyer. Tell the immigration services official that you want your hearing in the city closest to where you live, where there is an immigration court, so that they do not transfer your case. If the immigration services comes to your home, do not open the door. You have rights. Ask to see a search warrant. If the official does not show you one, you do not have to open the door. Do not sign anything, especially an order of voluntary departure, without first talking to a lawyer. Do not answer questions. Do not tell them anything about where you were born or how you came to the United States. Do not show any documents if the officials do not show you a search warrant. Do not allow the official to enter your home. If you will allow them in, you lose some of your rights. If the immigration service comes to your workplace, do not run. It is better to remain calm. You can calmly leave an area where the immigration service has come. If you are detained, do not answer any questions. Do not say anything about where you were born or how you entered the United States. Do not sign anything, especially an order of voluntary departure, before talking with a lawyer. For more resources regarding immigration rights, it says to visit an address in Providence. And that basically concludes the zine. There's some things that, as I'm reading it, at least years later, I would read it pretty often. I think from experience, at least in Los Angeles, police can come in the event of a potential ICE raid or ICE immigrant services comes to your door. If they suspect that the person is in the home, they will pend for a search warrant, meaning they'll just tell you that they're gonna wait there until they patch a search warrant through, and then they can show you one digitally, or they print one out in their car. I think the part about rights is really hard for me to stomach, only because witnessing so many rights violations it's very helpful for when you do go to court, and it's good to know, definitely, but rights aren't like a special magic force field that's going to protect you physically from harm. And they know that they can do whatever they want with impunity a lot of times. So I think the piece that I took away from this zine the most was the mutual aid and the community accountability portion. It's just really, really important to collectively resolve these kinds of conflicts, to make irrelevant the police. And since the abolition of the police is kind of at the tip of everybody's tongue right now, and defunding them and possibly delegitimizing, dismantling, disbanding, and ultimately abolishing them, I think these are really, really great steps to go. So the thing about community accountability, and this is what Mia Mingus has done extensive work around, is not having to be beholden to people who might need accountability in their community, who don't really know you. I think the best way to go about it, especially right now, is to start investing lots of time in reading up on community accountability practices and transformative justice, restorative justice, like eat it all up, because I think the labor is often a feminized labor that happens, right? So I know a lot of mediators and TJ workers who are often women and femmes, and we need more men and masculine of center energies and people to pick up that labor. And it's not, unfortunately, in our cis heteropatriarchal society, men and masculine peoples aren't typically socialized to really regard their feelings in such a way, to really talk things out. It's not as encouraged as it is for women. So I think we need to really resist the inclinations that we're social and the frameworks that we're socialized within, and challenge that. I'm hoping that more non-women, non-femmes can take on that kind of typically feminized labor. And yeah, like Mia Mingus talks about pod mapping and how important that is to acknowledge what people in your circle directly who you would be accountable to. So if you fuck up and there's another person outside of your pod that fucks up, both pods can, in engage with one another over an incident instead of like an entire city or entire block kind of process of accountability or tribunal of sorts. And yeah, this is just really relevant and important all the time. I think it is labor that is not easy. It's not glamorous in any kind of way. It's actually extremely exhausting, and it's made me leave movement spaces more times than not. And I think the last few years of my life, I've tried to dedicate a lot of energy into making sure that women and femmes aren't continuously having to leave our movement spaces because of the things that certain abusive people or people who commit harm and commit abuse or other physical assaults and attacks often do. And then when nothing happens around that, they leave forever. And I've just always been hurt by that kind of that loss of women and femmes specifically, and have definitely have left myself. And I think now it's just really, really important to invest more time and energy into that. Definitely put less emphasis on the violent, police as an institution, policing, and become just tighter with it. So that is the zine. I'm glad I could read it aloud, and just share that information. It's really helpful information. And it's talking about mutual aid, before pre-COVID, and I trust pre-COVID mutual aid more than I trust mutual aid after COVID, to be honest, because I've said it before, but it has been co-opted by the state and non-profiteers and NGOs. So that's all. Thank you all for